Oversized and over here, the new Jeep Grand Cherokee L has landed in Australia, bringing with it the option of 7 seats for the first time, generous proportions, and a pretty hefty price tag as well. We drove this vehicle only a few weeks ago in the US. Let's see how it fares on Aussie roads. The 5th generation Jeep Grand Cherokee lands in Australia from this month, bearing some significant changes over its immediate predecessor, which had an 11-year run on the Australian market. The 7-seat Grand Cherokee L kicks off proceedings with 3 variants available, including the mid-range Limited, largely driven here. The 5-seat Grand Cherokee will join from the first quarter of 2023 and is expected to lower the price of entry. There's also a 4xe plug-in hybrid version promised, but for now the Grand Cherokee range features a solitary V6 naturally aspirated petrol. There is so much that is new about the latest generation Grand Cherokee L, but one thing that does remain a generation behind is what's in the engine bay. Jeep's enduring 3.6 litre naturally aspirated V6 petrol engine, codenamed Pentastar. You've probably seen it, heard it before. 210 kilowatts and 344 newton meters. Now, unlike before, there is no petrol V8 option and no turbo diesel either. So for a vehicle that weighs 2,300 kilograms and is supposed to tow big amounts, it could be a bit of an ask. A 104 litre fuel tank ensures decent mileage between refills, though at 10.6 litres per 100 k's claimed, fuel use isn't exactly a specialty. Where the Grand Cherokee L is most likely to fall out of favour is towing capacity, which drops from 3.5 tonnes in the predecessor to 2.8 tonnes in the new model. One of the biggest changes for this vehicle has to be inside the cabin. You've got bristling new displays, both in the centre fascia and in the instrument cluster as well, and almost a European-like finish with the wood grain trims, the different materials at all the contact points as well. One thing I will say is that the centre fascia still feels and looks a little bit fussy compared to a lot of this car's immediate rivals. There's a lot of different buttons and switchgear, but importantly, vision is good, outward vision is really strong, everything is well placed as well, exactly where you want it to be, and there's excellent incidental storage as well. Quality materials adorn the contact points and go some way in justifying the hefty starting price, with a sleek 10.1-inch centre touchscreen matched by a 10.25-inch digital instrument cluster. We noted a couple of Americanisms with the screen, however, like the heated steering wheel button still located to the left. Elsewhere, the L's mammoth 3.1 metre wheelbase ensures excellent second row proportions. The seat itself is relatively flat, but wins back points with an open glasshouse and soft contact points. The second row features a fold and tumble function into the bleachers, where room is more suitable for the occasional 6th or 7th passenger. Boot space is long but relatively narrow, rated at 487 litres with the third row in place. Meanwhile, a full-size spare steel wheel is stowed underneath the car. Okay, so jump behind the wheel of Jeep's new 7-seat Grand Cherokee L, and yes, immediately it feels quite big, both in terms of the broadness and width of the cabin, but also the length of the car. When you look through the rear view mirror and over the bonnet, you do sense that you're in quite a long and big, heavy vehicle. 2.3 tonnes, do you feel that immediately when you pull away from the curbside? Not particularly. The throttle control is well modulated, the steering is light enough at low speeds, and I guess there's a user-friendly vibe to the way that everything has been tuned. While there's nothing overly offensive about the naturally aspirated V6 petrol, it feels and sounds relatively coarse compared to market rivals, and its peak torque count isn't realised until 4,000 RPM, the translation being that you really have to rev it to muster forward momentum. In terms of handling respects, look, it gets up and goes nicely, it's quite compliant, not as quiet inside the cabin as some people may expect for a $115,000 SUV, even for the $90,000 Limited, probably not quite where it could be. I think of rivals like the Volkswagen Touareg as a good example of a really nicely tuned, really well-rounded car, but For me, you tip this into a corner and it does feel a little bit disconnected, and it feels its weight importantly. It kind of transitions weight to the outside wheels quite appropriately, but the steering off centre feels a little bit vague, a little bit disconnected, and certainly it's befitting of a car of this size. The Jeep offers renewed refinement and comfort on the road with moderate bump compliance and cabin insulation. It's definitely a comfortable place to spend long trips, and the safety systems work benignly and effectively in the background. But we didn't stop there. After a few hours, it was time to hit the off-road trails in both the Summit and Limited to test the new model's off-road wares. Okay, so without that carryover towing credentials, the Jeep Grand Cherokee L needs another point of difference. And according to what Jeep have sort of told us, that is supposed to be off-roading. So we're at the Monga National Park. It's just outside of beautiful Nellingen and coastal New South Wales, a bit further down south. And immediately this car does quite strike you as being quite capable off-road. It's got decent approach, departure, breakover angles, four-wheel drive, and in the flagship Summit Reserve model you also get low range as well. But importantly, there are no diff lockers in any model available, and the Limited model that I'm in at the moment doesn't have that low range capability. So straight away it's at a bit of a disadvantage, but everything has worked quite well on the trails. You're relatively well cosseted from what's happening underneath you. I think there's still a little bit more head toss in this car than something like the Toyota Land Cruiser 300 Series GR Sport, which has that excellent kinetic suspension system. But the other thing is the engine. It just can't quite muster that same amount of immediacy as a turbocharged unit or a larger capacity unit. So there's been a couple of occasions today, and I'm about to come up to quite a snotty little hill climb, where you just need a little bit of instant grunt, and you can't quite get it from the Atmo V6. The Jeep's off-road potential is certainly a strength, though that lack of equipment and a 530mm claimed water weighting depth means it isn't exactly a segment leader. Elsewhere, the Grand Cherokee L makes up points with a 5-year 100,000km warranty, 5 years roadside assist, and cap price servicing that amounts to $399 annually. The new Jeep Grand Cherokee L makes a fine first impression both on the road and away from it, especially in flagship Summit Reserve form. The bigger test for this vehicle now is going to be under tow. Be really interested to see how it goes with a caravan or a boat behind it, because that's the way a lot of people are going to be using this new vehicle. It's also going to be really interesting to see what other engines Jeep can come up with in future.